Tadeu, a 22-year-old novice pilot, was in the cockpit for his first commercial solo flight. The air conditioning hissed, cold. Los Angeles, sparkling, awaited takeoff. He touched the yoke, its polished metal surface, and in a cold, brutal flash, he saw it. The Boeing 737 plummeting, a wing snapping, the impact on the rain-soaked asphalt runway. Flames licking the fuselage. The silent scream of twisted metal. Tadeu recoiled, cold sweat running down his neck. There was no time. He had to stop. Tadeu remained frozen in his seat, the echo of the vision still ringing in his ears. The cockpit, once a sanctuary of technology and order, now felt like a prefabricated coffin. He could smell the ozone and burnt metal, an invisible smoke that mingled with the cold air from the ventilation system. His heart hammered erratically, the rhythm of a war drum inside his chest. He glanced at the co-pilot, Marcus, a 40-year-old man with skin weathered by years of flying, and the calm that Tadeu desperately tried to emulate. Marcus was adjusting the final panels, oblivious to the terror unfolding in the young pilot's mind. Tadeu knew that the truth, the premonition, would sound like madness. His career, his life, everything was on the line. "Marcus," he said, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. "I need an extra check." "I believe there's a problem with the hydraulic system," Marcus frowned, not taking his eyes off the panel. "What did you see, kid?" "Everything looks normal." His tone was that of a mentor, a little impatient but fair. Tadeu swallowed hard. The lie formed on his lips, cold and convincing. "I didn't see anything. Just a strange feeling. A hunch. Better to be safe than sorry, right?" Tadeu's decision was like a stone thrown into a calm lake. The surface of Flight 739, which had been one of routine and efficiency, was disturbed by waves of frustration and confusion. In the cockpit, Marcus, reluctantly, began the check procedures. Outside, the ground crew, under a sky that was turning a purple-gray at the end of the day, gestured impatiently. Tadeu felt the weight of every gaze, the pressure of hundreds of lives in his hands. The chief flight attendant, Sandra, a middle-aged woman with a stern look, entered the cockpit. Her voice controlled, but her eyes a reflection of the crew's discontent. "Pilot, the passengers are getting restless," she reported. "There's a 20-minute delay, and they're starting to ask questions about what's going on." Tadeu kept his gaze fixed on the runway, the darkness swallowing the asphalt. "Tell them it's a technical issue. That's all I can say," he replied, his voice firm. He felt like a liar, but it was a lie that, he believed, would save everyone. The guilt of his decision was immense, but the relief of having averted disaster was even greater. He watched, with a mix of relief and terror, as the plane was emptied. People walked out in a line one by one. He had cheated death. For now. In the following days, Tadeu became a ghost in his own life. He retreated to his small apartment in Los Angeles, a refuge from a city that now seemed perilously alive. The sound of sirens in the street was a constant echo of his premonition. The smell of jet fuel mingled with the aroma of his morning coffee. He lived in a bubble of guilt, questioning the sanity of his vision and whether the decision he made was the right one. His dreams were a montage of fire, twisted metal, and now the anonymous faces of the passengers he had saved. He felt like a player in a cosmic chess game, where death was the opponent, and he was the pawn who refused to be sacrificed. On a gray, damp afternoon, he ventured out, seeking a break. He went to a bar in Los Feliz, a neighborhood known for its old houses and tree-lined streets. He sat in a dark corner, the aroma of beer and the soft, melancholic jazz music filling the air. But the peace he sought was an illusion. The television above the counter, a silent presence until then, began to show a breaking news report. The story was about a tragic car accident on Interstate 5. A family of 4, heading home, hit by a truck that lost control. The reporter mentioned their names. It was the Millers, the family that had been reassigned to another flight. The ground seemed to vanish from beneath his feet. Tadeu's world, which he thought he had saved, fell apart once more. He had saved them from death in the air, only for death to find them on the asphalt. Panic set in, cold and relentless. Tadeu rushed home, avoiding traffic, the subway, the elevators. He became a prisoner of his own paranoia, desperately trying to avoid the next trap of fate. A week later, a call. It was Marcus. The co-pilot's voice was low, somber. Sandra, the chief flight attendant, had been found dead. A gas leak. A tragic accident. She had just moved into a new apartment that day, Marcus explained, his voice thick. They said the wiring was faulty. Tadeu's heart sank. It was as if death, frustrated by his intervention, was hunting down those he had tried to protect. He hadn't cheated fate. He had only postponed the inevitable, and the result was even more cruel and insidious. Life had become a game of hide and seek, and death was always one step ahead. Guilt manifested in Tadeu like a silent disease. He felt like a living ghost, responsible for a miniature cemetery. Every night, his dreams were haunted by images of the plane on fire, and now, by the sad faces of the Miller family and Sandra's still body. The world around him had transformed into a minefield of potential fatalities. He saw death in every passing car, in every electrical appliance, and every light bulb. On a rainy afternoon, he felt an irresistible urge. He had to go back to the hangar. He needed to face the plane, the object of his premonition, the source of all his torment. The fog hung over the airport, a white and silent veil. The smell of jet fuel and wet earth was a reminder of what he had avoided, and what perhaps still awaited him. He climbed the metal stairway, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the void. The cockpit, dark and cold, felt like a tomb. He sat in his seat, the leather cold beneath his hands, and felt a strange calm. It wasn't the calm of a man at peace, but rather of a man who had given up the fight. His gaze fell on the co-pilot's drawer. Something compelled him to open it. Inside was the plane's logbook. It was a hardcover book, leather-bound, with pages filled with technical notes, pilot names, and flight dates. He picked it up, his hands trembling, and began to flip through it. Page after page, names, dates, destinations. And then he saw it. On a yellowed page, with the date of his canceled flight, there was a crew list. Marcus's name, Sandra's name, and his name. And next to his name, a note in elegant, fatal cursive script. Deceased. The logbook slipped from his hands, falling with a dull thud to the cockpit floor. The date was there. The list of the dead was complete. He'd avoided the flight, but fate had already counted him as a victim. The premonition wasn't a warning, but a memory. He hadn't been saved. He'd been a mistake, a ghost living on borrowed time. With a shiver that ran through his entire body, he knew his time was coming. The discovery in the logbook was a crushing blow. The universe, in some way, had already written his name on the list of the dead. Tadeu wasn't a hero who had saved lives. He was a fugitive, a man living on borrowed time. The life he was living now wasn't his. His had ended on the date of that flight. He left the hangar in a state of shock. The fog had intensified, swallowing cars and lights. He walked aimlessly, the cold penetrating his bones. The city of Los Angeles, once so vibrant and full of life, seemed like a cemetery to him. He saw the ghosts of all those who had died because of his decision. He stopped at the edge of a canal in a neighborhood he didn't recognize. The dark water reflected the lamplight in a distorted way. He leaned over, his hands trembling, looking at his own reflection. His face was pale, his eyes hollow and full of fear. He barely recognized himself. A taxi pulled up on the street, the light on top shining like a lonely lighthouse. Tadeu looked at the car, hesitant. The paranoia was a constant weight. Was this his next trap? A car accident? A head-on collision? He decided to walk. He continued walking, the streets dark and empty. The sound of his footsteps was the only thing that broke the silence. A dog started barking in the distance, but the sound was lost in the immensity of the night. He felt a strange calm wash over him. The tension, which had been with him for days, finally dissipated. He stopped running. He reached a busy street. Suddenly, a speeding motorcycle, coming out of nowhere, passed him, almost hitting him. He threw himself to the side, his heart pounding, and the bike crashed into a pole, the sound of the impact echoing down the street. The motorcyclist was lying there, motionless. Tadeu looked at him. The same helmet he had seen in the vision, the same model of the bike. Death had tried to get him once more, and he had escaped. But for how long? With each new escape, death seemed closer, more personal. He wasn't just postponing the inevitable, he was playing with fire. And he knew that, sooner or later, he would get burned. He returned to his apartment, exhausted. The smell of mold and dampness filled the air. The air conditioning hissed, a familiar and frightening sound. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his body trembling. He looked at the door. He remembered the vision of Sandra, how death had taken her by surprise. The gas leak. The poisoned air. He looked at the stove in his kitchen. Should he check it? Was death waiting for him there? He forced himself to get up. He opened the window, letting the fresh air in. He didn't want to give death a chance to get him in his own home. He turned on the television. The blue light illuminated his pale face. The news was on, and he paid no attention until a familiar face appeared on the screen. Marcus's face. The co-pilot. A tragedy. Marcus had been attacked in a dark alley in a dangerous part of the city. A robbery gone wrong. Another life. Another life on his conscience. Tadeu turned off the television. The silence returned, but it was no longer a calm silence. It was a silence full of echoes, of ghosts. He remembered the last thing he saw in the vision, before he blacked out. The smoke. The fire. Death was the end for all of them, and he was the only survivor. But was he truly alive? He felt like a zombie, a ghost walking the earth, waiting for his time. His life was an emptiness. His soul was a hollow shell. He was just a statistic that hadn't been finalized yet. Tadeu's escape came to an end. He felt it in his bones, a premonition that was stronger than any other. Death was no longer hunting him. It was waiting for him. He decided to go back to the hangar, to his plane. He needed answers. He needed to understand. The rain was falling hard, beating on the hangar roof. The sound was hypnotic, an echo of the storm he saw in his premonition. He climbed into the cockpit into his pilot's seat. The logbook was still on the floor. He picked it up and put it back in the drawer. He looked at the night sky, the dark clouds moving quickly, like ghosts in a race. He remembered the first time he looked at the sky when he was a boy, dreaming of flying. The clouds were like cotton, the stars like diamonds. Now, the clouds were omens, and the stars, silent eyes of a cruel fate. Tadeu closed his eyes. He allowed himself to relive the vision of the crash, the noise, the fire, the smell of jet fuel and death. He remembered what he saw in the cockpit. There was no one in the pilot's seat. The plane was empty. Death was waiting for him, but not in the air. It was waiting for him here, on the ground. He opened his eyes. The smell of ozone, which he had felt in his vision, invaded his nostrils. The hissing sound of the air conditioning in the cockpit. A gentle hum. He felt warmth on his fingertips. Tadeu looked at the control panel. The navigation lights and the cabin lights began to flash, an irregular and disturbing rhythm. He remembered the phrase he had seen in the logbook. Deceased. In a final act of acceptance, he closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He was no longer afraid. He had cheated death, but in the end, it had found him. He wouldn't fight anymore. The hum grew louder, a sharp, frightening crescendo. A bright, intense light, like a lightning bolt, filled the cabin. The Hook, the airport security team patrolling the hangar, saw the lights flashing and went to investigate. They found the plane in silence. The cockpit was dark, the lights off. The only thing that could be seen was a faint trail of smoke, an electrical smell, and the sound of static on the cockpit radio. When they opened the door, the pilot's seat was empty. On the floor, a pair of pilot's shoes was burnt but intact. And on the control panel, there was a single fingerprint, a burnt metal fingerprint.